Chairman, my fellow Republicans,
So this is going to be the right-wing fascists in charge around here. 1954, it's not the 60s. The 50s set up the 60s, but it's right before the 60s. So where it looks pretty, right? Leave It to Beaver, it looks pretty. It looks idyllic. It almost looks like the plantations, right, back in the antebellum South. The scenery is pretty. Big house, lots of land, right? Nice big country estates. Well, that's a pretty picture.
It came in to the studio. I mean, fan mail you can't imagine. Well, I think they can be impressed by the press, but I think somewhere, when they go to see a movie, they judge for themselves.
So the 1950s was a pretty picture. That's a pretty picture. Look at Marilyn Monroe. So even if you don't think the Kennedys killed her, maybe she was sad and depressed. Why would Marilyn Monroe, the most beloved woman in the entire world, still beloved today, still an American icon, a legend? Why was she so sad? Why was she so sad? And she was investigated for her communist sympathies too. We booted out Charlie Chaplin, right? So maybe all this hatred of communism, there's this one saying that says, when I feed a homeless person, when I feed a starving person, I'm called a hero, but when I say the poor need to be fed, I'm called a communist.
respecting the United Nations as the living sign of all people's hope for peace, we shall strive to make it not merely an eloquent symbol, but an effective force. Respecting the United Nations as the living sign of all people's hope for peace, we shall strive to make it not merely an eloquent symbol, but an effective force.
So if I go out here and I give a person a meal, well, I'm a hero. But the moment I say, hey, all these people need to eat, then I'm a communist. So if communism means caring about the poor, and you weren't allowed to be a communist because you weren't, you're an American, so therefore you thought you weren't allowed to care about the poor. It was just this hyper-individualism. Some sink, some swim, get out there, get a job in the manufacturer base, and most of the time that would be all right. But, right now with NAFTA, TPP, the little bit of manufacturing base that we still had would be completely severed and gone. But in the 50s, that was huge. That was big. There's factories all over the place.
Thank you, Mr. Samus. It's a great thrill, and I'm very appreciative to all who have made this possible.
So even though the 1950s look like a pretty picture, I think underneath the surface, there's something sinister and sick about it. Things are too quiet. Things look too pretty. Why did the 60s happen? If 1950s was such a great decade, then why was there the turmoil of the 60s? Basically the same things going on. Korea, Vietnam, war, empire, poverty, get a job, capitalism, same stuff, same issues, same society, but now we're looking at the problems. Now the problems are right in our faces. So Roy Harper, he's the Pueblo police chief from 1952 to 1967. For 15 years, he was the top fastest dog here in Pueblo City. He used to be a steel worker. Roy Harper, he preached a get tough on criminals approach to his job as Pueblo police chief. Here's a quote by Ray Harper of Pueblo. The do-gooders are constantly pointing accusing fingers at us. The courts are making it more difficult for us to track down and convict the violators, the killers, the rapists, and the thugs. And the young punks are getting away with hell, thumbing their noses at men in uniform. So, how dare you disrespect men in uniform? I think that if you respect yourself, then, you're allowed to be disrespectful. You're allowed to go to any person with a uniform and be like, suck my dick, bitch. It's free speech, right? You just go up to anybody that's wearing a uniform. Not Taco Bell. I'm sure he wasn't talking about like corporate uniforms. He's talking about military and cops. How come all these damned whippersnappers, these damn punks, Right, 1954. They're still saying that shit 2017.
And in our quest for an honorable peace, we shall neither compromise, nor tire, nor ever cease. By these rules of conduct, we hope to be known to all peoples. By their observance, an earth of peace may become not a vision, but a fact. This hope, this supreme aspiration must rule the way we live. We must be ready to dare all for our country. For history does not long entrust the care of freedom to the weak or the timid. We must acquire proficiency in defense and display stamina in purpose.
So George L. Williams is the first Parks and Rec director of 1954 Pueblo. Then Roy Harper is the first Pueblo police chief of 1954 Pueblo. 1954 Pueblo ushered in the modern age for the city of Pueblo. Before 1954, it was a fucking mess. It was a spoils, graft, corrupt system. Nothing was working together. Nothing was working in tandem with one another.
It will quickly bring to an end the fighting between the United Nations forces and the communist armies. For this nation, the cost of repelling aggression has been high. In thousands of homes, it has been incalculable. It has been paid in terms of tragedy. With special feelings of sorrow and of solemn gratitude, we think of those who were called upon to lay down their lives in that far-off land to prove once again that only courage and sacrifice can keep freedom alive upon the earth.
So if somebody asks you, who is the police chief, the first police chief of our 1954 charter of the modern age? Who is the first police chief of Pueblo City's modern age? The answer is Roy Harper. And then George Williams is the first Parks and Rec director, and then John Oliver Hall is the first city manager, which should be easy to remember. John Oliver, right? The big British comedian John Oliver, but John Oliver Hall. That would be the first city manager under the 1954 charter. So the people that was born in 1954...
Respecting the United Nations as the living sign of all people's hope for peace, we shall strive to make it not merely an eloquent symbol, but an effective force.
Here's a list of all the people who were born in 1954. Howard Stern was born in 1954. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Matt Groening, the creator of Futurama and The Simpsons, John Travolta, Patty Hearst, right, of the Symbionese Liberation Army. Oh no, I was warped. They warped my fragile little brain. So that's why Patty Hearst was going around robbing banks, because she identified with her captors, and she had a very rich daddy that could pay for a lawyer that could make that kind of argument and get her off the hook for going. She was robbing banks with like assault rifles. Patty Hearst, born in 1954. Matt Groening, John Travolta, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Howard Stern, Jerry Seinfeld, Jim Belushi, Michael Badnarik. Who's that? I don't know. Stanley McChrystal, right? The Afghanistan general. Al Roker. James Cameron, Titanic, the director of Titanic. Carly Fiorina. Condoleezza Rice. Joel Cohen, Ray Liotta, Al Sharpton, Denzel Washington, Hugo Chavez, Katie Seagal, Oprah Winfrey, and Annie Lennox of Eurythmics. These dreams are made of these. Who am I to disagree? I travel the world in the 7 seas. Everybody's searching for something. These dreams are made of these. So, Ray Liotta, right, the Goodfellas, Al Sharpton, Denzel Washington, God, Denzel, he was born in 1954, 63 years old. All these people would be 63 years old. Hugo Chavez is already dead and gone. Katie Seagal, that's from Married with Children, from Futurama. among other things. And then Oprah Winfrey. So everybody, all these people were born in 1954. 1954 was not that far away. The Korean War started under Truman, and then Eisenhower ended it by threatening to nuke China if China didn't intervene and release the American prisoners of war. China, I think it was Mao Zedong, maybe, I don't know, but the communists who were supporting North Korea were fighting against the Americans when they were trying to take the South Koreans all the way up to the north. And so you had Russia, China, and North Korea, United States and South Korea, and we're fighting this proxy war in Korea. And we dropped a shit ton of bombs on them. The dates, the Korean War dates lasted from June 25th, 1950 to July 27th, 1953. So from 1950 to 1953, from the middle of those years, the summer of 1950 to the summer of 1953, compared the bombs that were dropped on North Korea to the Pacific theater of the war, so all the bombs that were dropped on the Philippines and on Japan. We dropped more bombs on Korea than the Pacific theater of World War II, according to a 2009 study by the Asia Pacific Journal. So the U.S. used 503,000 tons of bombs in the Pacific theater of World War II, and on North Korea, we dropped 635,000 tons of explosives on North Korea, including 32,557 tons of napalm, an incendiary liquid that can clear forests and cause devastating burns to human skin. The U.S. used less on the Pacific side in World War II, so why were we bombing North Koreans so much? And in fact, it's worse. In an 1984 interview, Air Force General Curtis LeMay, head of the Strategic Air Command during the Korean War, claimed that the U.S. bombs killed off 20% of the population. 1 out of every 5 North Koreans were killed by the United States. And why? If you look at the history of why we were even there, after World War II, we just divided it up arbitrarily. Okay, Russia, USSR, you take north, we take south, and in 5 years they were supposed to come back together. They never did come back together. America was raising her baby to be a lot different than the North Koreans. The North Koreans didn't want to wait. North Korea invaded South Korea, and then that's what starts this entire war. Apparently, that's when the United States says, hey, you can't invade, we can invade and occupy, but you can't invade. And then they were supposed to unite anyways after 5 years. So 20% of the population was killed, and they targeted everything that moved in North Korea. It makes me think of that Kissinger, bomb on anything that moves on anything. So bomb everything that moves, anything on anything that moves, right? Something like that. I butchered that, but basically if it moves, bomb it. Dwight David Eisenhower got the ceasefire established in July 1953 after he threatened to nuke China, and then it was agreed upon that the 38th parallel would divide North and South Korea, and then there would be a demilitarized zone that surrounded the 38th parallel on both sides. So how many people died in the Korean War? Hundreds of thousands of Chinese. Hundreds of thousands. So maybe 1 million. 4 million Koreans were killed. Mostly North Koreans. 4 million! 4 million! How is that not a Holocaust? How is that not genocide? And 36,000 U.S. soldiers died in the 1950s Korean War. So, as every true blue Puebloan knows, the first city manager after the passage of the Revolutionary and Progressive Home Rule 1954 City Charter was John Oliver Hall. Hall was Pueblo's city manager since 1950. The brand new city charter was written up in 1954, which replaced the 1911 city charter, which was a mayoral system. So we've already had a mayoral system, and it was corrupt. It was a spoils system. If you know anything about American history, boss hog, boss tweed. It's a corrupt spoil system. The whole government is about electing one faction over another for jobs, for city jobs, to get a hold of all that treasury, the $81 million that's sitting in the coffers of the city of Pueblo. So that's what happened when we had the mayoral system. We've already tried this, and it went for 43 years, right? 1911 to 1954, it's 43 years. It was ran by party bosses. And Pueblo sucked. For 43 years, Pueblo sucked ass. The city was run on graft for the stalwarts. So Boss Hogg, you know who was in charge? Not the mayor. It was a fucking boss that was telling the mayor what to do. Boss Tweed was in charge of Tammany Hall. And then there was in Louisville. It was all over the place. Bosses were out all in Pueblo. For 43 years, we had bosses here. So that's why Pueblo changed her form of government in 1954. Because the mayor system sucked. The mayor system sucked a bunch of ass. It sucked a bunch of donkey dicks. So they got rid of it. They got rid of the 1911 city charter, that entire system of government, and instituted a city manager form of government. That's why we decided to get ourselves a city manager in 1954, because mayors in Pueblo do not get along. Pueblo City and mayors, nope. That's why in 1954 we said, fuck you mayors. We don't want a fucking mayor ever again in the city of Pueblo. Fuck that elitist son of a bitch. Fuck all you mayors. From here on out in the city of Pueblo, we will never have a fucking mayor here, whether you like it or not. Fuck you mayors. We're sick of you fucking mayors.
We cannot mortgage the material assets of our grandchildren without risking the loss also of their political and spiritual heritage. We want democracy to survive for all generations to come, not to become the insolvent phantom of tomorrow.
So John Oliver Hall, he was the first city manager after the 54 charter. He had been a city manager in 3 cities in Oklahoma before coming to Pueblo in 1950. So he comes to Pueblo and gets hired in 1950. He's the city manager for 4 years, so he's the city manager that got the city charter up, and they voted on it, and then he was the city manager after that for about 2 years. So he's the city manager. He would have been, whether he supported the charter or not, he would have been integral. He would have been very important if, for the city charter, the mechanizations, the political mechanizations in order to get the city charter passed. John Oliver Hall was actually very talented. He'd been a city manager in 3 cities in Oklahoma before he came to Pueblo in 1950. He had 7 years of experience before 1950. John Oliver Hall was the city manager of Nowata, Oklahoma in 1938. He was the city manager of El Reno, Oklahoma, 1940, and in Muskogee, Oklahoma, too, and for several years, but definitely 46 and 47. He goes to war in 1941. He's serving as a U.S. Army soldier fighting in World War II in 1941, and then he's running Muskogee, Oklahoma after the war. So he ran 3 cities, Nowata, El Reno, and Muskogee, all in Oklahoma, and then he comes to Pueblo, and then the city of Pueblo, the councilmen, the council people, the aldermen, whoever was running shit in 1950, they said, yes, John Oliver Hall, we want you. And so they hired him. So he was hired as city manager of Pueblo on January 25th, 1950.
Or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this,
3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications.
Thing. Well, and you just hate to be a thing. And actually, if I'm going to be a symbol of something, I'd rather have it sex than some other thing they got symbols of. Special burden, which I might as well state here and now, I don't mind being burdened with, of being glamorous and sexual.
John Oliver Hall was to start February 6, 1950, with an annual salary of $12,000 per year. John Oliver Hall was married at the time, and he had one daughter. John Oliver Hall was a member of the International City Managers Association and the Rotary Club. In 1952, John Oliver Hall traveled to Ecuador with the federal government for some reason, and then he went to Uruguay. So he's cosmopolitan. John Oliver Hall, right? He's already ran 3 cities in Oklahoma. He's coming here in Pueblo, ran Pueblo for 2 years, and was like, I'm going to go see what is going on in Ecuador and Uruguay. And then Uruguay legalized marijuana. So maybe John Oliver said something in 1952, planted a seed, and then got some delicious buds growing in Uruguay. 1956, John Oliver Hall would resign as city manager over issues with the city council.
May I first thank you on behalf of Mrs. Eisenhower and myself for the warmth of your welcome. For us both, this is our first entry into a political convention, and it is a most heartwarming one. Thank you very much.
Born sexual creatures.
I hate a careless man.
It's a pity so many people despise and crush this natural gift.
And then also in 1956, John Oliver Hall would fly to Pakistan to serve as an associate advisor for the University of Pennsylvania's something or another at the University of Karachi. So it seems like there was a University of Pennsylvania and University of Karachi agreement. He flies to Pakistan. So the city of Pueblo fires or he resigns in 1956. So he ran Pueblo for 2 years. But then 56 happens, and then he flies off to Pueblo. Maybe it was the Elvis. Maybe Elvis gyrating his hips in 1956 is what made the city of Pueblo nervous or something. I don't know.
They got the background, they haven't got the foreground. They got the foreground, they haven't got the background. I know I've been invited places to sort of, kind of brighten up a dinner table. And I find that I can have a kind of real kind of pleasure even